Welcome to this Sustainability Society webinar. Um, really exciting one we have today. Really interested to see how our panel looks at this idea around the passenger rail between Tāmaki and Tauranga. I think those attendees are creeping up now. So let's just basically, I'm a member of the Sustainability Society. My name's Ed. I've been helping arrange these webinars. This is the second in a series of 3 events that we are doing. Not a clear link really between any of the topics, but just sort of things that are interesting to explore. And our next event after this one is actually going to be in 2 weeks' time. We're going to hold a live panel event here in Auckland at the Isthmus office on Queen Street, and Simon will be emceeing for us again, and that will also be live streamed. But in the meantime, I'd like to welcome everyone to this event. And I am going to jump out of the way and pass it over to Simon, who will then bring all our panelists together for an introduction. So thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you, Ed. Kia ora tātou. Ko Simon Wilson tako ingoa. I'm a senior writer at the New Zealand Herald, and I spend my time trying to find ways to persuade people to think more seriously about transport, housing, a whole range of urban issues. It's my very great pleasure to be moderating this session this afternoon. We have about 90 minutes, and we are going to hear from 4 speakers, and I hope have a vigorous panel discussion, vigorous discussion, not only among those 4, but also with everybody who's listening in as well to take your questions and see what they make of them. Now, we're going to be using Slido, and if you are part of this webinar, you should have received or will be receiving information to tell you how to use, how to get into the Slido link. So that's the preferred way. If it doesn't work, try the Q&A on the webinar itself. But Slido is what we're hoping to focus on. The session is being recorded, so just bear that in mind. The 4 people we have with us this afternoon, the first is Ben Ross. Ben is a senior planner with the Waikato District Council and associate member of the New Zealand Planning Institute. Ben writes a lot about rail transport and does a lot of deep thinking about it. We have Heidi Hughes, who is a former city councillor in Tauranga. She's now associated with the Wednesday Challenge, which is an initiative that engages students, businesses, and others in mode shift. We have Daniel Hedefin, who's a program director with Kiwi Rail, but that's just his day job. He's with us today as the chair of the New Zealand branch of the Rail Technical Society of Australasia. He's a railway nut. I mean that in the nicest possible way. And we have Angela Strange. Angela is a Waikato regional councillor and the WRC spokesperson for Te Huia. Te Huia, of course, just yesterday, front and centre momentarily, and I guess I should say a special welcome to the people from the Waikato who are in the place right now that I kind of feel like it's the centre of the universe. I hope that doesn't pass. Anyway, moving on. We're going to hear first from Ben, and each of our 4 speakers will be speaking for several minutes, 5 minutes perhaps, introducing themselves, their kind of core ideas around this wonderful topic. Tāmaki to Tauranga, a passenger rail network. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Simon. Kia ora and afternoon, everyone. So as just mentioned earlier, I'm a senior policy planner for Waikato District Council. In a previous life, I've been a consultant to various councils up and down the country, as well as to international jurisdictions and authorities as well, including also training them on all things transport and urban planning. Earlier this year, Fran O'Sullivan and the esteemed colleague Simon reached out for me to contribute to a Project Auckland piece on transport, to which I forwarded the current iteration of passenger rail between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. Now, this is not a new idea. It's come forward over the decades. In 2017, my esteemed counterparts at Greater Auckland did their version of it, which I have now sharing on the screen, where they had the various lines go out to Hamilton, to Aotearoa, to Tauranga and Te Puke, even out to Cambridge, and then of course extending the service to Wellington to more than a daily service, and possibly the introduction of a sleeper service going overnight between Auckland and Wellington and vice versa. This was in 2017. In 2024, especially after we've had a regime change, have picked up the policy again or the idea again, and decided to run with it and basically start off with getting into the Herald to generate or rekindle the memories again of it and reach out to a broader audience and see what the reaction was on where this might end up. The feedback that came back to me directly or through the organization that I work for was very positive. What was most surprising, though, with this idea of trying to bring back intercity rail between Auckland, Hamilton, and Tauranga was where the feedback and where the support was actually coming from. It was primarily coming from National Party supporters, which came a little bit of an initial surprise to me. But when I heard their reasoning why, when I probed deeper into it, it was actually very logical. To them, it would be the same as how, say, now the opposition would see it. They saw it as an alternative to get to work in Hamilton or vice versa, or if they're going on holiday to Tauranga. So the same objectives as what I was trying to do through the blog post. So then over the next few months, I opened a dialogue with the supporters and all the feedback, and basically two emerging themes came forward. One was the support for an hourly service to Hamilton from Auckland, so it will always be from Auckland, and a 2-hourly service from Tauranga 7 days a week, including public holidays. The second thing that came forward, emerging theme that came forward, was cost, mainly in CapEx, so the investment into it, more than operational expenditure at this point in time. And basically the challenge was, could we do it for as little public dollar as possible? Meaning, given the current challenge we have in our transport space at the moment after the announcement earlier this week, we should not expect subsidies in any way or form coming through Waka Kotahi or the National Land Transport Fund. This is going to have to be done through private endeavours or even a public-private partnership, which means I would have to look overseas to see how this was done. In this case, enter Japan, who are the world masters, not only in rail, but also doing it with through public, where it's fully private, or through public-private partnerships. Now, the first question that's going to inevitably get asked is Japan's population. That is correct. They've got a much bigger population than they have. But as I always reply back, you scale to the population you've got available. So you would scale to what is in our region to say what was servicing between Tokyo, Kyoto, and down the line like that. But it's just more than transport. It also covers the urban development that would follow the lines. So in the Waikato, you've got Tuakau, Pokeno, Te Kaupira, Huntly, Ngāruawāhia, then Hamilton herself. And as you go out east towards Tauranga, you've got Morrinsville. You then go through the Kaimais itself, and then you would start picking up the outer surrounds of Tauranga before Mount Maunganui. And the idea is, if we're going to bring in the private sector or overseas authorities to do this, they will want to know where they can go in the urban space as well, because it's the urban space that pays for the operational expenditure. And it's also the urban space that pays for the capital expenditure as well, because they use the real estate to leverage off. And then through this, I came up with a 3-stage plan, which the panelists will help me touch on using what we've got. Then I saw Heidi's post this morning on doing the quick wins, the cheap quick wins, so we can step up further. And then we make our way through to the full extent of the system, where we can get our trains, say, to hourly and up to high speed level as we continue to do the infrastructure. So again, we use what we got, we do the quick wins, and then we start doing the long-term investment through time to bring it up to a fully fledged service. So that's the idea, where the idea comes from. Finally, if we do bring in international operators to do this, they will have an expectation of a concession in return, which is fair enough. Auckland One Rail, which runs Auckland's passenger system at the moment, has a concession. It would be something like a 25 to 30-year concession for this operator to not only run the service to how we contract it, but they've also got to make a return as well. That's expected. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Simon, to our next panelist as after these opening remarks.
Ben, thank you so much. There's an awful lot to talk about in that, and I think we'll do our best to come back and unpick as much as we can. Our second speaker is Heidi Hughes from Tauranga.
Nice. Hi, everyone. I actually grew up in Hamilton and spent a lot of years in Auckland and then moved to Tauranga. So I'm invested in all three parts of the journey. And I'm kind of bringing a Tauranga perspective to this. I moved to Tauranga 10 years ago. I'm an advocate for better urban form and transport. That kind of builds cities that are better for environment and for people, and that are places where people want to live rather than where we're parking cars, which is currently how a lot of our cities feel, especially our downtown area. There's just a staggering amount of land being set aside for tarmac for cars at the moment, and my area of interest is how can we transition that so that our cities are more about people and environment and living. I used to take the train from Auckland to Tauranga when I was visiting my parents many years ago. It was brought in as one of the Silver Fern trains. It took 3.5 hours, and it went from Auckland to downtown Tauranga, and it was disestablished in 2001. Since then, we've had some kind of activity over time of advocacy for getting rail back up and running. However, it was really the Greater Auckland 2017 piece that really started in Tauranga. We did a lot of advocacy around that work at that time, working with Greater Auckland to see if we could get that some political will going at that time. However, there's a real strong rhetoric in Tauranga that kind of sits, oh, we're not big enough, it's too expensive, rail is something that they do elsewhere, it'll never happen here. So it has been a really difficult process, and politically there's not really any strong drivers right now for regional rail, which is a big kind of handbrake for us. There was in the regional land transport plan, there was an opportunity for Tauranga, for Bay of Plenty Regional Council to partner with Waikato to do a business case on regional rail, and they turned it down. So the business case has not been funded through Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So it's challenging from our end. And however, and I just want to, before I finish my introduction, I just want to briefly touch on the idea that I didn't think that you could currently take a train from Auckland to Tauranga, but however you can, and Glenbrook Vintage Rail will charter a train from Auckland to Tauranga if we wanted it to. So I'm kind of working on a background project to see if we can get a little pilot off the ground where we chartered a train and actually had it turn up to downtown Tauranga. So I think that kind of advocacy and that kind of piece is what's needed to show the politicians what is actually possible and what it looks like when 400 people get off a train in the middle of your downtown and spend money in your local community, which is something that Tauranga really needs right now. The other thing I just wanted to mention too is that there are 100 flights per week going from Tauranga, between Auckland and Tauranga at the moment, and those are short flights which would easily be replaced by rail, getting to many of the international transit opportunities, and so the carbon emission savings in going from flights to rail is massive. Kia ora everyone, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you. And I guess we'll all be looking forward to the Glenbrook vintage railway excursion.
Oh, right.
But
3.5 hours, though. It's not
yeah,
on the steam train, I have to
no, I'm
say.
sure you're right. No.
It's-
And so much more to come. Okay, we're moving on now to hear from Daniel Hedefin. Daniel, are you with us?
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Daniel Hedefin toka ingoa. Haven't been called a rail nut before, but I take it as a compliment.
You should.
I'm a civil engineer, and most of the last 25 years I've spent working in railways in various roles, both in New Zealand and in the UK. I'm also actually a regular commuter on the Capital Connection that runs Palmy to Wellington. Not the whole journey, but taken that trip huge number of times. I'm just going to share something. Hopefully I can share it all right. Because I've got a bit of a hypothesis here, and that is that in New Zealand's railway network we've got capacity, we've got capability that we've forgotten. So I'm just going to go through a couple of stats. Between Hamilton and Auckland, we've got the Tahuia train, which I've been involved in, and it has a timetable of around 156 minutes. But I'm not showing the Tahuia train. I'm showing a couple of other rail cars from the past. So the red one that was built in the Woburn workshops in Lower Hutt in the 1930s, and in 1967 that ran the Hamilton to Auckland route in 94 minutes. Then the other train, and I've already heard Heidi mention it, that's the Silver Fern, built in Japan. And in 1986, that ran that same route in 107 minutes. And you go, boy, there's a bit of a time difference here. What's going on? So why is it so different? Well, they didn't stop. There were special trains put on specifically to see how fast they could make the journey. Tahuia stops 4 times. So you're going to have more time for that. But that important piece, that stopping for intermediate stations costs you time. But the other bigger thing is that because they were special trains they put on, the line was signalled to have no congestion on it, to have no other trains in front. And so that really helped them keep their speed up and make that really swift time. Now the Silver Fern has running rights of 110 kilometres an hour, and the line between Tauranga and Auckland has running rights of 110 kilometres an hour. Doesn't mean that you can run a train at that speed, because you've got curves that are tighter than allows. But yeah, that Kaimai Express used to be able to theoretically go up to 110 kilometres an hour, I think is a useful piece to be aware of. And so what would be stopping trains doing that right now? Well, it's actually a bit of a success story in sustainability, because it's a success story in rail in the Upper North Island. You've got massive congestion in the Auckland Metro. Well, you've got congestion in the Auckland Metro. Why would that be a good thing? Well, when the Kaimai Express stopped in 2001, there's probably about 3 million trips a year in the Auckland Metro. Pre-COVID, that was, I think, it was possibly either cracked or it was close to 22 million a year. So there's a massive increase in the number of trains that are running. At around the same time, in that 2001, you might have had around 20 freight services a day between Tauranga and Auckland. Now it's about double that. And again, that's a huge success story, because 70% fewer carbon emissions when you're moving freight on rail versus road. And the safety stats, I don't think there are comparable safety stats. Rail users are so much safer comparable to road users. It's really hard to compare that. So again, I think these are successes, but they create challenges for that Hamilton to Auckland route. So that's a capacity thing, not necessarily a capability piece of the rail network. And there is things that can be done in that capacity, but those will be big challenges. So my next slide, if I can get this to work for me. Just thinking of this big goal, long distance passenger rail between Tauranga and Auckland, versus the challenges and how to turn that into reality. And I'm going to use the City Rail Link as a bit of example. So it's going to transform Auckland massively once it's operational, and it's in that commissioning type stage now. But when City Rail Link is thought of, it's not something that someone said in the late 90s or the 2000s, got to build that 3.5 kilometre tunnel now. That's the first thing to do. There's a bunch of stages that went through there. And so I'm pointing out, I was involved in the study back in 2010, feels a bit of a time ago, but that was actually an intermediate piece of the getting City Rail Link working. And something we were really conscious of, the other diagram there is a grade diagram, and it shows a really steep railway. It's in the 1 in 30 type piece. And you just, as rail engineers, you go, that's crazy. That's no railway in the world thinks of making a 1 in 30 grade because it's just nuts. That rail doesn't work like that. Obviously, it's going to work because it's almost finished. But that sort of challenge had to be overcome. And the way I see that it was overcome successfully in Auckland Metro is the staging of things and taking small steps. So buy some rolling stock secondhand from both the UK and from Perth. That's done in the 90s and early 2000s. And you're double tracking, bringing people back in the CBD and Britomart, early 2000s. Huge stage step. Double tracking the Western Line, doing up your stations in the noughties, 2010 decade. You're electrifying and you're procuring a whole new fleet of rolling stock. And all the way through, the biggest challenge has been looked at constantly, and that is there a customer base? For each of these stages, proving that there's a customer base to take you successfully to the next stage. Deliver this, as your customer base being proven, you can justify moving to the next stage. And I see that's going to be one of the biggest challenges, is there that customer base here? And City Rail Link, all those steps, it was continuously reproving that it was a viable option. So I see, for the others in the panel, I'd say that's not my sort of bag in the customer base piece, but I'm hoping that you're there for thinking about that customer base challenge. Thank you. I'll try and turn that off.
Just muted there, Simon.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Daniel. And we're moving on now to Angela from the Waikato Regional Council. And we will come, what I was just saying completely to myself was Daniel has just set down a challenge there to identify the stages in which Auckland to Tauranga might be built up, and we'll come back to talk about that. But first off, Angela.
Thank you, Simon. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Angela Strange, tuku ingoa. Yeah, it's great to be here today, so thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I'm a second-term councillor here at Waikato Regional Council, and I've had the privilege of being involved in the establishment of Te Huia, connecting the Waikato and Auckland. It's been quite a journey coming into the establishment of Te Huia, but I really believe, my background is I'm a teacher, I'm a mum. I didn't really see anyone on council who was advocating for what I saw myself as being, I suppose. But I really believe that transport unlocks so much opportunity, education, employment, leisure, social connections as well. Yeah, and just firstly, I want to acknowledge all those people who came before me in getting Te Huia to the point where I joined the journey through different political mechanisms and those policy settings in the initial beginning as well. Along the way with Te Huia, we have had lots and lots of challenges, but in a way, re-establishing the rail intercity, interregional rail between the Waikato and Auckland. It's not the first time it's happened. We've heard Heidi talk about it before. So keeping Te Huia going has probably been my number one focus these last, especially this last year. With the change in government as well, and the change in focus around moving away from investment in other modes back to more road focused, unfortunately. Basically, yeah, here at the Regional Council, we're really keen to cement Te Huia into our continuous public transport offering. And for that to happen, we do need the continued finance and funding for that to continue. At the moment, our FAR rating from NZTA is stepping down. So we did have, for the first 3 years of Te Huia, we had an extended FAR rate of 75%, which meant that the government contribution was 75% and the remainder was paid for by our ratepayer. So the gradual stepping down over the next 2 years to the usual FAR rate of 51% is going to mean some challenges for our ratepayers, and we are really keen to explore other options of making Te Huia financially sustainable, as well as meeting our climate aspirations as well for sustainable and giving people options for travel as well. Through our work with Te Huia, it really is true that when they say build it and they will come, it is true. We've seen really great patronage growth through Te Huia, and even the increases from this last quarter to a year ago, fantastic gains in patronage. So we're just really excited to see out the 5 years of the startup trial and then get it into the continuous program. Within the Waikato as well, we're quite progressive in that both our RPTP and our RLTP have kept the door open for interregional passenger rail. We've got it in there to go over to the bay. However, we haven't been able to get that same political willingness coming back towards us from the Bay of Plenty, unfortunately. So something for me to work on. The other challenge for us as well, with our location within the Golden Triangle, is our relationship with Auckland as well. Te Huia, you know, initially was Hamilton to Auckland. I think a lot of people saw it as. However, it's always been a big part of our story that it is about connecting Waikato and Auckland. So enabling that bi-directional travel between both centres. And at the moment, for the next 2 years, we have probably got no more money to do any improvements. So what we've got is what we'll see for the next 2 years, just with our limited funding envelope. However, we would love to speed up the train. We would love to have more stations in North Waikato and pick up more people. We would love to work in with Auckland a lot more, and yeah, really see that our proposed stopping at the Pukekohe station and offering a limited stop service for Aucklanders as well could be something that we could work in with Auckland. And regardless of a paper boundary on a map, that we would see our communities as being seamless, and transport, no matter if you live in Auckland or North Waikato, that you are served well by interregional rail. Yeah, just also want to acknowledge the partnerships that have made Te Huia possible so far. And within the corridor that Te Huia passes through, there are so many partners, even Hamilton City Council, Waikato District Council, ourselves, the Regional Council, alongside Waka Kotahi, Kiwi Rail, and obviously Auckland Transport, Auckland Council as well. So a number of players who need to work together. So yeah, relationship is really key as well. But yeah, I'll leave it there. But yeah, thank you, Simon.
The Bombay Hills don't exist, eh? Angela, I wonder if I could just pick up on a couple of things you said there. The RLTP, I think probably councils around the country struggle with their RLTPs this year, particularly in relation to the government policy statement, trying to make things align. And Waka Kotahi itself was pretty frank this week, wasn't it? That in their view, there were a number of RLTPs that don't align. And I guess we can understand various reasons why for that. But given that you tried, given that I imagine a whole lot of the things that you wanted have not been reflected, and obviously funding for rail is a part of that, is there a kind of next step? Perhaps it's Pukekohe, but I'm thinking, if Te Huia is to establish itself through this trial as properly valuable, what are the key things that have to happen, given the funding constraints, that might make that happen?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Simon. I think, well, I know that in the next 2 years, we are working really hard to make Te Huia work. So definitely stopping at Pukekohe station would be a huge benefit to us. We know that the current government and their focus on fare box recovery is incredibly important. So proving that we can get paying passengers on the train, and Pukekohe is a fantastic opportunity. The infrastructure is right there. We're just waiting for Auckland Council to consent it so we can stop there, and we're all ready to go. So that station will provide connections for all of our residents in the North Waikato, because we don't have stations yet at Pokeno or Toko. So, and yeah, the District Council has got initial business cases for those stations. However, it's going to take a number of years for that to happen. So if we can work in with Auckland Council and Auckland Transport and bus our people who live up that way, up to Pukekohe, then it's a win-win, I think. Also offering those residents of Pukekohe a limited stop express into Puanui and beyond, I think is a great start as well. So, yep, definitely stations in the North Waikato would be a big one. Also at the moment, the burden of paying the local share for Te Huia does fall on the Hamilton ratepayers and some parts of Waikato district as well. However, we do see that our service benefits Auckland as well. So we would love Auckland Council to come on board and stump up their share, some people would say. Yeah.
I'm sure Wayne Brown will be all ears. Can I just ask you about, you talked before about wanting to see Te Huia being a rapid service, and also you've been talking about more stops. Do those things exist in contradiction, or is that a false contradiction?
I think they can exist at the same time. However, for maybe your peak services, you would have less stops.
Express services or something.
Yeah, so I think maybe off peak you could stop at all stations, and on peak you would maybe choose which ones you're going to stop at. So I'm sure one of our transport planners would have a more eloquent way to say that, but yeah.
I wonder, Daniel, could I bring you back in at this point? You talked about the stages in which the CRL got developed and then built, and took us through a really, really nice little summary of how each bit leads to the next, building up demand, building up demand, building up demand, until it becomes clear the CRL is not just a nice idea, but actually going to be essential. How do you see that happening on the line we're talking about now?
Or yeah, the build it and they will come always needs that some certainty that there is going to be this much customer base coming. But rail, in some experience we've seen, it gets underestimated, and that's there's a level of conservatism, and then it exceeds, and that's happened in Auckland Metro. Again, I'll kill it pre-COVID, because that sort of disrupted everything, but it was beating all of those expectations. There was a requirement for City Rail Link would only get such and such level of funding. Once the Auckland Metro hit, I can't recall if it was 15 or 18 million, something like that, and it hit it years in advance of when people were predicting it. So that, you know, a really good news piece. I think, and it might have been Ben said, I like the idea of the starting with smaller chunks that you can look at, but some of it is what is already in the pipeline, or what is already things that are getting proposed. So one of the things and I say this not as a KeyRail employee, but as a rail technical society person, but I look on KeyRail's website, and so I see it's public. The desire to quadruple track between Pukekohe and into the Auckland Metro for a section, and there is triple tracking. I think it's between Wiri and Westfield at the moment.
Yep.
That separates out some of those slower freight journeys, and it also gives the potential that you can have express services. So not something as common in Auckland as versus Wellington. And I said I'm a Capital Connection commuter. I'm actually from Waikanae. So when I was first living in Waikanae, it was the only train I could take. Suburban units reached it, and I still take it, and so do a lot of others from Waikanae and Paraparaumu. And why do they do that? Because it's actually an express train. It doesn't stop south of Paraparaumu, and it gets us about 5 minutes saved off our journey time of an hour. And you think that's not much. Psychologically, it feels huge. So when I take an all stops trip from Waikanae and it takes me 5 minutes longer, I sit there fuming, thinking, oh, this is just so slow. There's a psychological win of keeping going, but there's also, you can have that faster journey time, and it could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes, depending on the how it's set up. So that using the limited amounts of track capacity to try and increase the speed of a journey through that decongesting, I think that would be something that could get looked at. How could this be planned for? It's not the reason it's happening, the Te Huia or a Kaimai express type train, but it certainly would benefit it. And so plan for those benefits that other things are going to deliver you.
Right. So would any of our other panelists like to jump in at this point on this issue? How you increase the viability, desirability?
I suppose what's KiwiRail's appetite to duplicate the line out the back of Merrimeri Swamp, which at the moment we know is a single line, and if we're starting to increase not only our passenger services but also our freight services, particularly our MP services, wouldn't duplicating that single line between Merrimeri and Kōwhira also start coming in the mix? Not only does it benefit us as passengers, but it also benefits the freight network as well.
Yeah, adding lines has been the key to strengthening the Auckland rail network for sure, and
yeah,
so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Anybody else?
Could I just say something that Ben said there, that picking a benefit that's going to not just be for one particular service, but that's going to be for network as a whole. The freight services between Tauranga and Auckland are really successful. Like I said, there's a bunch of positivity about them. Doing benefits, staging that benefits those, plus additional benefits for Te Huia and potential other services. Picking something that wins all round. That sounds great. I don't know when that becomes a constraint, that particularly I think it's the Ruakura Swamp, but it could at some point. Yeah, but it's not just going to be for one passenger train. It's going to be for those 40-odd freight trains as well.
We have a question on Slido, and just a reminder to people that Slido is there, and we are looking at your questions, and we'll be feeding them in. Could Te Huia be integrated into the AT network more closely, perhaps by allowing AT hot cards, things like that, to increase patronage, make it more financially viable? Angela, is that what you were hinting at before?
Yeah, we have had conversations with Auckland Transport, especially once we can stop at Pukekohe station, about how those passengers would pay for their journey. So as part of the nationwide ticketing system that's about to come on board in the next few years, Auckland is also looking at having like an open system as well. So we could just grab a couple of their boxes, for lack of a better word, for our Auckland passengers to be able to pay for their journey as well. So that sort of open system would be your not so much your A2 hop cards perhaps, but just your credit card, the open
Yeah.
system that we see with the Oyster cards in London and elsewhere, which the nationwide ticketing system will allow. So at the moment, there is that B card and the AT hop card, which our passengers do have to have both if they're going between the networks. So yeah, can't wait for the nationwide ticketing to come on board, and
it's not going to be that long, is it?
No, it is really soon. So yeah, this is Te Huia could be a really good test case for using both B card and the open system on board. So yeah, always keen to be a guinea pig.
Ben, did you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, Angela pretty much hit the nail on the head. The new national transport card is due out soon, looking from all the announcements from Waka Kotahi. So that would be the biggest, one of the two biggest ways to bridge the two regions. Again, the open network, which basically tap and go with your PayWave card, would be the other, which is done international. So that's the one good way of integrating the system through basically what is integrated fares.
Can I
Heidi,
just ask
yes,
you-
Heidi.
sorry,
yeah,
take it.
Yeah. No, sorry, yes, Angela, the idea of bringing Morrinsville into the mix to kind of creep towards Tauranga and integrate some of your outer suburbs is I guess wrapping them around the option of being able to go to Tauranga and thereby increasing the number of passengers. Has that been looked into, and is that on the cards at all?
Yeah, it has been looked at. Obviously going the other way as well, down to Te Aomutu, further south. That actually has more infrastructure, I would say, as well. Again, it just comes back to funding constraints, really, and that partner willingness as well. So obviously Morrinsville is a different territorial authority, Matamata Piako, who are part of the future-proof groupings. Also Te Aomutu, that is the Waipa District Council. So again, a different TA that we work in with. Yeah, very complex within the Waikato region. However, yeah, it could be a stepping stone towards that staging perhaps. However, population base, it might not have enough. The other thing to bear in mind as well is, which is our rolling stock at the moment. We are looking at joining the bid with Greater Wellington into getting new rolling stock, and that is, yeah, that will be a real game changer, especially given the conversations around electrification between Hamilton and Pukekohe. Yeah, so if we did go for battery electric, that goes in with the electrification conversation as well. And then the different alignment perhaps that Ben has talked about as well. We do have single tracking through the Whangamarino swamp. So whether we realign, and yeah, the question is, do we need to electrify if we're doing battery electric locos? And then the other question also around new rolling stock, of course, is who pays. So ideally, rather than having, say, Auckland Transport, us in the Waikato, and then Bay of Plenty, could we have one organisation that runs interregional rail in the North Island? Yeah, is another question.
Yeah, because you mentioned those authorities. There's also Western Bay, there's Tauranga City Council, there's Bay of Plenty Regional Council. There's like so many different overlapping authorities that have to come into this mix. So, and it makes it incredibly complex.
So with half the population of the country living in this region we're talking about, there's a potential for an enormous network, isn't there? Yes. Heidi, you mentioned the Greater Auckland proposal from 2017 for rapid regional rail, and it was narrow gauge. The trains went curved around with a camber on the track. All of that. Are we now talking about? You'll have to excuse me for not knowing the answer to this, but are we now talking about something that is still possible for something like that to happen, or have we moved past that? Are we going to have to be incrementally developing something that just builds and builds on what we have?
I think Ben's probably got his kind of piece about about how we can fund this. I mean, really, it comes down to political will. At that stage, when that came out, it was just before the elections, and we had Jacinda Ardern in Tauranga saying, let's do this. And at that time, and then I guess the reality of the time that it takes to get the business cases done, to come to the next steps. We were really lucky that Tahuia has happened. I think that it's such an anchor for making this whole project a reality, because it's there. And as Angela said, like, if we can only just keep that going, at least we know that that's a starting point. However, that piece, there's a bunch of things that have changed. The government's different, and the obviously the economics are different as well. And where the idea of the tilt trains and going 160 kilometers an hour are completely viable on our track still, and all the information about it taking 2 hours to get to Auckland, that all of that is still viable. The problem with going 160 kilometers an hour, however, is they pass freight trains because they're going faster, so you need more double tracking and you need more, so
you've got to have something to pass them on.
Yes.
Daniel, did you want to comment on that?
The 160 kilometers an hour narrow gauge, well, Cape gauge, narrow gauge, you can be any narrow size. It's in the Gold Coast over in Aussie, so it has potential. Just one of the things I'd say is that the rail has been between Auckland and Hamilton. It is between Hamilton and Tauranga. It's a freight rail that trains are only running at 80 k's an hour. There hasn't been the need to invest in faster running speeds than that, because the freight services aren't going to appreciate it. But if there is a need, the track in those areas, there are long sections that are very straight and can easily cater, like I said before, for 110. And there's quite a few areas that you'd look and say curve easing to take it from 80 k's to 110 is quite doable. And that's something that in the roading side, it's been done for years, of just easing curves progressively, often because of the safety benefits, because you're not safe going around that tight curve. So we need to make it faster so that you can possibly drive less safely by driving at 100 kilometers an hour. Rail it's safe to go around. Is there a need to be faster? I think that could be a small iterative piece, getting far more than network capable of 110 kilometers an hour because the Tahuia train potentially could go at that with the DFB locos that it has, and the future ones that are getting looked at for. I thought that was awesome, Angela, that mention of linking in with Greater Wellington and the people there, because New Zealand is not a huge market for rolling stock. That groups around the country looking and combining, I think it sounds great. And if you're doing that, you'll have trains that can go faster. They could go 110, possibly they could go 120. And you're getting there with the infrastructure that we've got right now without billion-dollar changes. At a point, people are right that you need to be able to pass slower freight services. But if you're talking a couple of trains in the morning like Tahuia, then that is really doable with both the double track we have and possibly third and fourth mains towards the metros and maybe some more passing loops. If you start talking a train every hour, that's only actually adding 2 trains into the mix. These things can be planned out without having to go all the way from Tauranga necessarily to Hamilton and double tracking that. Maybe not at 160 kilometers an hour, but certainly at that 110 and maybe small iterations above that. We see it actually in between not just Palmy and Waikanae, where it's all single track and you do run capital connection and stuff, but there are single track sections about a 3.5 kilometre piece within the Wellington Metro that takes about 100 trains a day, and it manages to do that to a timetable. not, I'll say, at 160 kilometers an hour, but at into the 70 type kilometer piece.
Right.
Oh, and one more thing, if they're going faster, they'll pass each other quicker, so they get out of the way of each other quicker, which has this sort of inverse relationship.
Okay, we have some slider questions, and I'm going to fire some of these in at this point. Peter Cochran asks, 2 things will be key in the long run for interregional rail. One is mixed use density around stations, and the other is excellent local PT and bike connections. Ben, do you want to field that?
I can certainly take that and what I will do there. So it's been touched on by Daniel about you need to build your customer base. That is absolutely correct. Now, when I've been teaching abroad, and I still do so at the moment on the side, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
One of the introductory slides when I was teaching in the Middle East and Europe is that you've got an ongoing relationship there. You've got that transport is going to affect your land use. Your land use is going to affect your transport. So here comes your mixed use. And both are going to affect, in this case, drop city, because I was looking at cities at the time, your regional user experience. So taking the question there, the situation. So you need that customer base. That is correct. And if you want to attract international investment, that customer base is going to be important. Enter the mixed use around the stations that the services are going to stop at. So you've got 2 things running in parallel to each other. Now, it's easier said than done in New Zealand compared to jurisdictions in the Northern Hemisphere and even in New South Wales. New South Wales has an entire planning ministry, looks after it, looks after both their transport and urban development in one go. Example, you've got their metro, which has just come online with all the urban development happening around those stations. In the Northern Hemisphere, it's also standard practice. So to Peter's question, yes, we need that mixed use around all those stations because this builds our customer base. And despite Auckland still being the fastest growing city, people also leave Auckland as well for various reasons, but still work in Auckland. So the question goes back to Peter's, how do we coordinate this? The question is, it's a struggle at the moment because we don't have the agencies to do it. Now, Chris Bishop, Minister Bishop's National Infrastructure Agency might help coordinate up the investment side, but we don't have a national planning agency to bring Auckland, Waikato and Bay of Plenty together to do the supportive urban planning down the line either.
I want to come back to Chris Bishop's plan soon.
Yeah.
But I am aware that, you know, everybody understands the theory that if you build up your housing and residential and commercial employment density near transit lines, then you're going to have more people wanting to use the transit. There's a political will question that underlies it, isn't there? We have a town in this country at the moment that is actually on the Te Huia line, but has no station. That's Pokeno, which is growing enormously, has industrial as well as residential. No plans for a station. Any comment on that?
Well, this is where the two agencies would look after it and take it out of local and regional's hand, but also technically out of central's hand as well, because there's a third element as well. We have the finance, and I forgot what it's called, that local government can tap into, extend it. So if the agencies determine Pino needs a station, then the agency could go directly to the funder and just do it. The only thing central government has to worry about is just the accountability of it, because it's still public money involved in this instance. If it's private money involved, there's still accountability on the way out as well.
There's also the question of whether you simply have political directives that steer people in the favoured direction. A question here: a few countries are banning domestic flights over short distances. These are countries in Europe, I think, which can be covered in less than 2 or 3 hours by train. I think it was you, Heidi, who said that at the moment we have a lack of political will or lack of political leadership to do things like this. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I think we're a long way from making those kind of progressive policy decisions. That I think it's Paris that's made that first call, and anywhere that's accessible within 2.5 hours by public transport now, planes are banned from operating. And as I said earlier, that we in Tauranga, it's possible for our rail to get to Auckland within 2.5 hours pretty achievably, and we have currently 100 flights a week going to Auckland. So the predominant flight is to Auckland for connecting flights, and also just to get backwards and forwards, because people don't take the bus from Tauranga if they haven't got, or if they don't want to have an option from their cars, they fly. So so there's a lot, there's a lot of potential there in terms of rail. Our airport, for example, is right in the middle of our city. So if you take out the need for an Auckland flight, then do you need an airport in the middle of your city, or is it better to have a regional airport? And then you've got the economic uplift of the land that's sitting under that airport that could be close enough to a rail line. So I think it's that kind of systems thinking around widening the lens a little bit and looking what we're trying to achieve that isn't really happening so much at the moment. We're kind of at the moment in Tauranga, for example, we're swinging between, well, where's the government money, and the government money's in roads. Yeah, sweet as we'll say yes to some roads because there's just so little funding kicking around. So when things are that tight, political will is sometimes kind of based on what people are prepared to accept rates rises wise, and then what can be achieved.
While we're talking about political will, I wonder if we could just talk for a moment about the new setup for infrastructure development that Chris Bishop, the Minister for Infrastructure, has announced. To Waihanga, he has them develop, that's the Infrastructure Commission, he has them developing a 30-year strategy. The theory of it is that it will be independent, driven by experts and independent of politics, so that it has some chance of getting cross-party buy-in for long-term planning, which, of course, the horizontal infrastructure industry is very keen on. And at the same time, as Ben just mentioned, the new National Infrastructure Agency, when it's set up at the end of this year, will have the specific job of finding money, organising money, and coordinating the use of money from the private sector and also from the public sector. And those two agencies are going to work together. There's an awful lot of politics involved in the whole thing, but at the same time, Bishop has made it clear that both those agencies will be open to unsolicited requests, unsolicited projects, to private sector projects, to council projects. It's not just going to be what the government plans, but the best and brightest ideas from elsewhere as well. And I wonder whether panelists feel that opens a door for Waikato Regional Council, or Waikato Regional Council and Auckland Council and Bay of Plenty as well, coordinating on a proposal like we're talking about to try and meet the criteria that are developed for long-term infrastructure, and if you like, circumvent whatever the petty politics of the day are around which projects MPs favour. Is this new cross-party long-term aim for consensus going to make things easier with private sector money as well? Ben, any thoughts?
If they're going to take unsolicited bids, we have had precedents in the past, although we'll need to learn from that lesson very quickly. And that's when we had Auckland Light Rail's second iteration kick off, when the Canadians decided to come in with their public-private partnership. With
the super fund.
With the super fund, there's technically nothing stopping that happening again for intercity rail, but we need to learn the lessons from the Auckland Light Rail disaster into if we were to do it here. There's nothing stopping Japan coming in and doing it, but there's got to be a rate, in all fairness to them, there's got to be a rate of return as well. Say, okay, will come in and invest and run these services for you, but they'll ask for a concession in return, such as 30 years, and maybe some incentives to do urban development around our stations as well. So we win through urban renewal in our towns. We also win that there's private money coming in to do these services as well, because we have to remember in the Northern Hemisphere, most of their fare box recovery is actually not from the so-called ticket itself. It's what's called from non-fare revenue. So that's the authority who's running the transit service. They're getting it from non-fare. So that's usually from their real estate around the stations. And when you've got your Asian cities returning NFRs of over 100%, so scale it to us, that'll be about 75%. It's a case of, why aren't we inviting them here to do it? If not to do it, to teach us how to do it. Yeah. Maybe we should be open to being good students for this.
So you think there are opportunities here. Angela, do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I'm really excited by the proposal. I think in New Zealand, we're such a small country that we need a bipartisan agreement around long-term transport infrastructure. It's quite frustrating from a local government point of view, the way that we swerve all over the road depending on who's in government. Yeah, I mean, this recent NLTF, yeah, when as a community we've put forward our bid of what we believe our communities want, it might not line up with the current GPS, but we also have our long-term vision for what our communities need. And it would be great if, you know, the Infrastructure Commission could look long-term and multimodal as well. So sure, if we need roads, go with roads, but we also need a resilient transport network as well. So that's your rail for freight, for passengers, it's your walking, your cycling, it's your public transport as well. Because we do, you know, we've got an aging population as well. Not everyone wants to drive a private car, and yeah, trains and rail do have a role to play, especially with our young people as well who don't drive, and increasingly for climate consideration are not wanting to drive either. So yeah, a bipartisan buy-in and agreement would be great. You know, I have heard other commentators say that, you know, given that this current government, since they've got in, have thrown out so much of what the previous government have done, that asking for bipartisan agreement is a little bit rich at the moment. However, yeah, proof is in the pudding, and I'd love to see us come together and think long term, and think not just for ourselves in this moment, but long term for our grandchildren and many generations after that as well.
I've been talking to Chris Bishop about this, and think there's a whole lot that's positive in the way that you're suggesting. I have to say I've been struggling to find out from him how he thinks the criteria for projects might be managed. And shameless plug, I've got a story on this in the Herald on Saturday. But one of the things that really strikes me is that if there is going to be some kind of independently developed set of criteria for what we need to build in this country, and if it has economic value, if it has equity value, and if it has climate-related value, then regional rail's probably going to score quite well. And if those criteria become publicly accepted and adopted, it could have the effect of changing the game. Am I being unduly optimistic? Anybody want to shoot me down on this? Heidi?
I won't shoot you down, but that does make me just to endorse that, is that currently we're not doing business cases that looks at the comparative analysis between roads and rail, or rail and bikes and everything else. So something like this that looks at a holistic approach to looking at all forms of transport and then weighing them up, I think would be incredibly valuable, because it's just really not happening at the moment. That you can't really see. Yeah, we're not getting that in our business cases, because they're all either done through Waka Kotahi or Kiwi Rail or local councils.
Right. Daniel, do you have anything to add to this?
I'll say on an infrastructure sort of pipeline, there's not many that work in infrastructure that don't think that's a good thing. I'm going to shamelessly quote from Sean Sweeney from the City Rail Link. I've been involved with various things through RTSA that he's presented at, and him making the point that New Zealand's infrastructure capability, and coming back from overseas, delivering this huge project, seeing that it had gone downhill in the time he'd been away, and that all of the capability for tunnelling, a lot of expat New Zealanders thought this is great, and they came back to Auckland and they've all gone again because there wasn't the work for them to do. And that is going to continue to cost us more, that you get big specialist jobs and you have to bring them in from overseas, and then you're paying to bring them in, and you're paying to send them overseas again, because they're not going to do it at a cost to themselves. And that's just not going to be an efficient way of, it's not going to be cost effective. The other one is the stop start of projects. I work with lots of people in private practice that are pretty forthright at telling you how much that costs them, and they can't take that cost. They've got to pass that back, and generally it's going to go to ratepayers or taxpayers. So not having a pipeline is a huge issue. Is it going to be the perfect pipeline? I don't think it ever would be. I'd be concerned that the method of delivering or the method of judging is always going to have some slant to it by whoever is deciding that at the time of it's put together. But having something is certainly got to be better than
What we have now.
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
I was almost going to say that exactly. Yep.
One of the things that Bishop was very impressed with, he told me, was the Sydney Metro, the newly opened line there. He loved the photo op that happened when they opened the line, and the current premier and previous premiers from Labour and the Liberal Party got together, walked down the platform together, got on the train together, and shared in the glory of this new facility. Because it had been bipartisan, it had been set up by the New South Wales Infrastructure Commission, and had kept going despite cost overruns, despite everything else, whoever was in power. We're going to see that in Auckland with the CRL in a couple of years when it opens. We're going to see every politician who had anything ever to do with it clamouring to be in that photo to take part of the credit, which is a fabulous thing in my view. And I guess what we're really talking about now is how do we turn the proposal for regional rail into the same project, same idea, the same, everybody wants it, so everybody's going to help make it happen. And Daniel, you said before, we've got to go bit by bit by bit. And I guess that means continuing to improve Te Huia. It means also putting in more double tracking. It means the particular questions around what stations should be developed, paying special attention, I think, to bringing in Tauranga, Bay of Plenty. All of those things have to keep going, don't they? And they need a consensus of politics. And maybe the new long-term planning will be the key to it. Maybe it won't, but there's a chance. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I just think it might be a bit of a lowball remark, but I hope some of those politicians involved when City Rail Link opens go back to the comments that were made. Some of them might still be around, that they made at the time of business cases being put forward and stuff, because some of them took pretty extreme views as to was it a job that should happen. And history is good at quoting your past, and before they make comments in future things, like on what we're talking about, they might think our history will judge them. And I won't say which one it was, everyone can Google them to see comments that were made about comparing it to the Simpsons monorail, the City Rail link.
Yeah, I know. My view of
Good
that
fun
is
quote.
my view of that is, if the current government want to take credit for the CRL, which they constantly do, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Infrastructure all do that. Well, fine if it means that they're committed to seeing it through. But I do hope that they invite Len Brown to the opening, because he made them make it happen. We've got a question here. How can connections to Te Huia be improved? From what I understand, there's still no bus connection to Frankton. And I think this is a big question here, because it's not just about providing the core transit service. It's about the connectors. It's about making that transit service a viable option, an attractive option for a very wide range of people. So throwing this one at you, Angela, how can the connectors be strengthened so Te Huia is strengthened?
Yeah, good question. We know that the first and last mile is really important when it comes to public transport. Possibly the unfortunate thing about where the rail stations are located in Hamilton is that the new station at Rotakoti is the best connection for all our buses and other connections as well. Unfortunately, the location of Frankton just being slightly removed from the city centre and the bus station, it's not the best location, to be honest. However, we will work with what we've got. And those bus connections do need improving. We do have plans to make those connections a little bit better, and we've had good feedback from a number of advocates in this space as well. So yeah, we just need to make it happen now. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame it hasn't happened already. However, we've had good feedback from our other station in Hamilton that the connections are there and they are getting better. So yeah, Frankton does need a little bit of work, I acknowledge. Yeah.
Anyone else like to comment? No other comments from another question here. Could a first step be to establish a commuter rail trail in Tauranga, connecting Aotearoa through to Tauranga and then on to Papamoa and Te Puke? This one's going to you, Heidi. Is that something that is at all viable? Just a trial?
I would not say it is. There's not enough infrastructure to do it cheaply, and currently there's just no political will or money. We had an urban form and transport called spatial plan done sort of 5 years ago called UFD, and it was making a decision between a rail-enabled development pattern and a connected centres development pattern, and they swayed in favour of a connected centres development pattern, which pretty much scuttles the opportunity for metro services unless it's attached probably to a regional rail service and then builds out from there. So I think the biggest potential in my view currently is regional rail, which then offers opportunities for places like Aotearoa and Te Puke and Mount Maunganui connection services.
Right. Another question here. How does the current funding model for public transport pose barriers to interregional passenger rail? Is it actually not fit for purpose? Ben?
No, it's not fit for purpose. Angela has pointed out that although Te Huia runs into Auckland, Auckland does not pay a cent for it, even though Auckland benefits from it. So we have to, the funding, the PTOM or public transport operating model needs to be restructured towards as we start going into regional again, especially if we start getting private operators coming in as well, because they will want to work out the revenue sharing as well. That said, with the National Transport Card coming online, there's your big opportunity on revenue sharing. So if Te Huia takes the card, how's that revenue going to be split between Auckland and Hamilton, as well as both funding into it?
Exactly. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, good points, Ben. I think currently as I mentioned before, our boundaries around councils are all based on catchment, rather than communities of interest and logical transport connections as well. So North Waikato is a classic example between Pukekohe is Auckland and Tuakau and Pokeno is Waikato. And they're just down the road from each other. So if we are working more with Auckland Transport to try and get those communities connected, with Auckland Transport providing their bus services down to our communities. And this example of Te Huia picking up their rail passengers before their rail starts again at Pukekohe station. It's just a fantastic example of regional councils working together. But it would be great if we could change the funding model so that you know, Auckland does contribute and we contribute, and then moving forward as well into Bay of Plenty as well. It just makes sense. If people are benefiting, then yeah, they should pay as well.
Angela, is frequency a constraint on growth for Te Huia? Should there be more trains?
Yeah. We know that frequency drives patronage. People love it. We've just
if you miss it, there's another one coming.
Yeah, we've increased our offerings on our busiest days, which are Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we've just seen huge growth. You know, just different train times suit different people, and it's great to be able to offer people choice. And yeah, our patronage numbers are really proving that those options do provide the outcomes that we need.
Does anybody know how much capex we are looking at to extend Te Huia to Tauranga?
Ooh, on what frequency base? It'll be the frequency that'll be the frequency that determines it.
Is because the frequency will also determine how much double tracking is required, or
It will determine rolling stock, crew requirements, and what level of infrastructure you need at the destination.
So you go back to Daniel's point, you've got to build things up incrementally. Yeah, because that's always a problem with a railway, isn't it? It's end to end, whereas a motorway you can build another 10 k's of an extra lane anytime you like, and it's
the reason why the frequency question comes in, if it was a couple of times a day, then you could rebuild where the station was and on the outskirts of Tauranga city centre. But if it steps up to a certain level, Daniel would notice it could start interfering with the freight services, and you'd need a passing loop to the side for the passengers trains to come off. I'm not sure what the threshold would be there, Daniel, that would warrant a passing loop at the Tauranga end.
I wouldn't be able to tell you straight off, but you would think a service offering that starts off somewhat similar to either the Capital Connection or Te Huia is a starting point. And when you have when I recall what the stations they've been done up, but what they used to be like for Capital Connection, people will use something that's quite basic. There has to be a safety level, but you don't need to go to the all bells and whistles. A fun fact in Wellington, I don't think there's a single lift or escalator on any station in the metro. Carries over 12 million trips a year, whereas in Auckland there are lots. And do you need that sort of infrastructure when you create new stations? I'd suggest for your trial type ones, just looking what is safe and comfortable, but not over designing something, not going for your cathedrals, as I think a politician mentioned recently. And
you did.
And going for something that's functional. But railway stations, I think I also saw in an article, they are a place that can be quite a draw themselves. But once you've got once you got Gare du Nord sort of happening, then build Gare du Nord.
We'll look forward to it. We've got about 10 minutes to go, and I want to ask all of you question not about how feasible things are or how much they'll cost or those sorts of things, because we've talked quite a bit about that. And I think I think there's an easy agreement really, but nothing's easy, but it's all doable. The big question, I think, is political. How do we persuade politicians? How do we generate public support? And then, as a consequence of those things, also, how do we fund and finance things? But particularly, how do we persuade politicians and how do we persuade the public as well? Heidi, would you like to lead off on that?
Yeah, sure. I've been in that advocacy space. If I had an answer for that, I'd be like,
yeah, right. Yeah, I know that feeling.
But I tell you what, yeah. But I tell you what, this morning I got on the phone with a couple of our local politicians to find out, if anything had changed in the political sphere before I got on this phone call this afternoon, and I mentioned, and they were both like, one was Bay of Plenty Regional Council, one was Tauranga City Council, which is a brand new council. They're both like, oh, look, there's nothing going on here. And then I said, you know what? I've got this idea to charter a train and just have it show up in Tauranga City. And they both went, what? Are you serious? So, yep, we could bring 400 people to downtown Tauranga. How would that be? And then their eyes lit up and their ears pricked up and they got really excited with me. So I think it's about trying to get to this place with political leaders that they can see that it might be a possibility, because it feels like from our end at the moment that it's been this kind of ongoing thing that's been like, oh, it'll never happen. I would just love to see a train roll in just once, and I think that in terms of advocacy would be a starting point to getting that vision as something that it's actually, you can come through the Kaimai Tunnel, you can roll into the Strand, and maybe it'll happen. So that would be my my contribution there.
I can tell you also that your new mayor was at the Infrastructure New Zealand conference last week, Building Nations. Very attentive. So
yeah,
he's listening.
Nice.
One that I'd say, and I don't know the local councils and local government in this area as well, but from Hawke's Bay, and I'm in Hawke's Bay at the moment, I've been working here on the Cyclone Gabriel piece, and as going back 30, 40 years, I recall Hawke's Bay being quite famous for the councils not all joining up and linking up and possibly working together. Boy, they work together now, and they looking at something together in this whole cyclone recovery piece. It's been commented on a few times as to how they've put aside whatever differences to focus on goals. As I think there's about 5 councils doing that, and it's noticeable and it's impressive. And I think if a transport route across lots of different local government boundaries, getting that sort of everyone focusing on that goal together, and including Auckland's councils too, that would be quite formidable for central government to hear that joined up advocacy.
I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah. Angela?
Yeah, I think for me, it's highlighting those co-benefits. So we're looking at the Golden Triangle. It's a key freight line.
Yeah.
So, what benefits freight makes it also possible for passenger rail as well. We just had our Regional Transport Committee meeting this morning and had a presentation from Kiwi Rail about the electrification of the Golden Triangle and how that's progressing. And how
is that progressing? Can you tell us?
It was a public meeting. It is progressing really well. In the investigation into what kind of locos would decarbonise the freight rolling stock as well. It seems that battery electric is the way to go. Also electrifying where it makes sense with the overhead lines. So a natural progression would be to extend the electrification south from Pukekohe to at least Pocono, hopefully down to Hamilton as well. we're quite fortunate in the Waikato that a number of years ago, the Regional Transport Committee did put in extra passing lanes on this side of the Kaimais and possibly the other side of the Kaimais for freight, which enables, the Kaimai Tunnel to actually have capacity. I did ask the question this morning as well about the Kaimai Tunnel and what that decarbonisation of freight trains would enable, because we do know that a key constraint is the diesel fumes through the tunnel at the moment. So that's why they're not keen on passenger rail as well. But once that decarbonisation does happen, then it does open the door up for more freight and passenger rail as a possibility as well. So that's really exciting. So for me, my message would be highlighting those co-benefits. We know Kiwi Rail does have to make a profit through their freight, but it also benefits those of us wanting passenger rail as well, with a great rail line with decarbonisation and freeing up the roads as well to have less potholes with less heavy trucks on them as well. So I think it's just telling the story that people want to hear, really.
Yeah, and continuing to tell it, telling it and telling it and telling it. Yeah. Ben, what would you love to see happening to persuade politicians?
Well, the good news is with the public, I believe we're already there. From the feedback it goes, the public are mainly supportive, providing you give them an option, a choice of which way they want to go with funding, whether it's fully public, public-private partnership, or fully private. So long as you let them have their say in that screen there, they are usually happy to support it. Our politicians,
who don't believe the public support it. Well, some of them.
Well, as much as I have taught overseas jurisdictions, it might be time to teach our domestic jurisdiction and bring in the international experts from the Northern Hemisphere, sit down with our politicians over a week and have not only a 101, and I'm doing a bit of a shameless plug for what I did 2 years ago in Saudi Arabia, but also a practical workshop with them to help them build up their knowledge and show how it's been done, how it can be done here without breaking the bank as our current challenged transport policy is. So yes, a big 101 with our politicians, because I did catch a news article the other day of a certain national MP in Hamilton, very supportive of speed tables outside his local school. It is a shame his transport minister is a little bit more challenged in this space. So the politicians are 99% there, but I think we might need to have a masterclass with them to help them along the way.
Masterclass, of course, you'd have to find some way to make them turn up, wouldn't you?
It's called the elections every 3 years. Your vote depends on it.
Yes, you're probably right about that.
Yep.
Any other last comments from any of the panelists? No? Okay. So what we've got to is that a rapid rail network in the Golden Triangle is viable. It's completely doable as long as there's political will, and we'll be as optimistic as Ben in believing there can be political will, which means that we've got to push and push and push. I always like to think that if you're talking about any kind of public transport, you don't need to go to Europe or South America or anywhere else and say, look, it works there. You can go to Auckland, the city that everyone loves to think is addicted to cars, and you can look at the Northern Busway and show what a success it is. You can look at the double tracking of the Western Line and show what a success it is. Those things are right on our doorstep and have happened. And Tahuya itself, of course, has exceeded its expectations to date and has enormous potential to grow beyond that. Ed, are you still here? Would you like to make some last comments before we finish, or will you leave that to me?
No, I'm still here. Yeah, it's been great tuning in and listening to what everyone has to say. And yeah, Heidi, sign me up for that first train trip back into Tauranga. I'm looking forward to it. just a massive thanks, everyone, for your time and contributions to this event. We really appreciate your ability to get online and be a part of this. As the Sustainability Society, as being a part of Engineering New Zealand, it's always good to be able to sort of put these challenging ideas out there, I guess. And I really like to thank Daniel. It's the first time we've actually collaborated and reached out to the RTSA to have a joint sort of event here, and I think it's gone really well. I'd love to talk further with you around what we might be able to do, and I don't know. I think there's a great link here as well. If you can help with Heidi's train idea, free up some freight trains for a single trip into Tauranga, that'd be great.
We'd love to be involved in future events.
Excellent, that's great. I'll give us. We're going to wrap up now, but we'll just quickly say that we do have one more event planned coming up in 2 weeks' time, as I mentioned at the start. So there are some. I think there's a link that's just gone onto the webinar chat. You can sign up for that event now. It will be live streamed, and tickets for that are free. But if you want to attend in person, there is a cost, just because we are doing this at the Isthmus offices on Queen Street. And we're looking at ecological build zones. And so this is an idea where we might be able to reward developments, say with bonus development rights, such as extra floors, if they put in green roofs or green infrastructure, or have low carbon built into the way that they create their buildings. So that event's coming up. We'd look forward to seeing people there. But in the meantime, thank you all very much for your time. Really appreciate it. So hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
And thank you to the Sustainability Society for putting it all on. Thank you.